Hi, Michelle here, and thank you so much for joining me here on YouTube for another Bloom in 5. And this week we are painting really pretty herbs. So if you'd like to see me paint these, then let's get started. So we are painting 5 herbs today, and I'm starting off with my Nasu 8 brush, and we are doing a rosemary branch or twig, and we're also painting a pretty basil, a mint, some dill and parsley, not in that order, I've just realised. And we're just using our Artify 2 brush to start after using the other brush for the branch, and we're just using some varied greens to paint the little leaves of the rosemary. As you can see, this is a sped up version of the video with voiceover, but the real full version is on Patreon. The link is in my bio, where I talk through all of the specific colours. There's a palette included, all of the reference images for the herbs themselves as well. As you can see, I'm gesticulating, showing you the brushes, and a proper talk through on there with everything that you need as a guide to paint along with me or to improve your painting and watercolour skill. So now I am moving on to the dill, and you can see we're just using varied greens again. So we're using a light, nice grass green here, just using that smaller brush just to create some of those little tiny little leaves to the dill, and then just adding in various different greens and really laying that up later when it's dried a little bit on the first layer. It's important to always let your first layer dry so you can get in those other colours and details to your watercolour design. So you can see I'm just moving along here and just adding in some different colours, some more grey greens, some brighter greens, and also some darker greens for those background areas as well, just to create this a little bit more realistic in depth, and adding in the bottom stalks as we go as well. So you can see those varied greens really help create a more of a 3D herb there rather than something that looks quite flat on the page. And this is always a good technique to look at the colours of whatever you're painting and try to create some varied colours within it, which will help it stand out a lot more and not appear flat. So if you do have an issue where your watercolours appear flat, do look at using some similar colours and a bit of a varied palette. We're now moving on to one of my favourite ones, the basil. I do love using herbs in my cooking. I cook quite a lot in my kitchen, and yes, so I do love a bit of basil, and we're just painting in some of the flatter leaves. They have this really nice curve to them, and we're just painting those in as I have sketched them. The sketch is all included on the Patreon as well, including watching me sketch them, which you can use or skip through, and also the sketches are provided for you to download on there if you do want to practice a little bit more of your sketching skills. So as you can see, we're just going to leave that to dry, and we're moving on to our mint plant, and we're adding in some of the stalk initially, and there's some pretty sweet white little foliage which we paint in as well shortly. And I'm just using the very tip of the brush just to add in some of that foliage round the top. Oh, my husband gave me a cup of tea, so I'm just was explaining that on the camera, and then painting in some more of that little foliage and those tiny little leaves and flowers as well. So yes, a cup of tea is always appreciated when painting, especially as the electrics have still not been fixed in my studio. This is an ongoing issue, so it's a little bit cold in there, and I can't put the heater on at the moment if I need to. Even though it's super sunny outside, there isn't a lot of sun that goes into the studio, which is a shame, but then it's also great for painting because then I don't get any light glares on my paper. But hopefully he's coming next week, so I will update you if it's sorted. So as you can see here, I'm just painting in some of those really pretty details on the mint leaf, and then we're moving over to the parsley, and these have some really pretty colours and some nice spiked shaped textured leaves, so we can paint that in using a bit of a darker green there, and we're just pulling down to that stem and then adding in some of the folded areas where the leaves are curled, which adds a nice variation to painting. And you can see we're using some of those darker colours to represent some of those darker areas, and we're just painting those in using the tip of the brush and the flat part of the brush for the larger areas. So this is coming together really nicely, and you can see we're using some more sort of olivey greens and some more nice limey greens to create this really pretty parsley herb. And we're just adding in some more colours now and just using the tip to create those nice spiky edges and bringing it down. So we've waited for our first one to dry, and we're just going to add a little bit more detail to our rosemary now and really build up those layers. And you can see we've switched down to our smaller brush and we're just painting in some of those varied leaf sections to the rosemary itself and building up those layers to the leaves and adding a little bit of detail here and there. And now we're just adding in a little bit of those darker stalks and a few of the darker varied colours as well to really help build that rosemary branch and that rosemary stalk, and using a darker green yet again. It's always good to vary the leaves in different directions, and it helps it to appear more realistic rather than have all of the little leaves, the rosemary leaves, going in the same direction. There was a tiny little smudge error, so you can see I'm just tidying that up. As you know, I'm very clumsy and often end up catching the watercolour, so you can see I'm just tidying that up nicely. And then using a different brush, I think this is my Artify 7, I'm just going to paint in some of those darker leaves and add a little bit of detail where it's darker on the actual stem as well. And then also painting in, using a darker green, some of those background little mini leaves, and you can see I'm just painting that in. I don't tend to use dill a lot. I think I used it a while back for a dip that I was making, but I don't tend to use it a lot. So if you have any good suggestions for dill, then do let me know, because the other herbs I use a lot more of. So yes, it's quite an interesting flavour, the dill. So yes, you can see that we're just adding in some varied colours again, and it's coming together really nicely, and it looks really sweet and quite a lot of form to it. So that one's gone really well. And then we're moving back over to our central basil, and we're just going to add in some leaves and leave a bit of negative space for that central vein on the basil. And that's coming together really nicely, and you can always just lift a little bit of colour if you feel like there's some nice highlights that you want to achieve on the leaves themselves. And then we're just mixing another dark colour just to overlay and leaving some gaps where those veins are slightly lighter in the painting, and this really helps to create that nice rounded leaf shape and leave those little vein details. The smaller leaves aren't as detailed on the basil, which you can see from the reference image if you do join us over on Patreon. There's a lot more details over there, so you can follow along. And you can see we're just going to paint in the other leaves. Some of them are darker and lighter, so we're just following the image along and just adding in some of those vein details and leaving that negative space as needed. And this leaf was almost like the underside, so we're just adding in a little bit of detail here and there just to help that really come to life and create that 3D look of the leaf. And now we're just adding in some more darker colours, and it really helps balance between that light and dark of the basil leaf itself. And then we're going to move on to our mint leaf, and you can see we're just mixing a little bit of brown there to complete some of the stalk detail, because some of it's brown and some of it's a little bit green, and then just adding in some of those nice mint green colours onto the leaf itself. Funnily enough, the leaves weren't particularly mint, they were quite dark in colour, but you can see we're just adding in a few more details to that pretty foliage area at the top with the flowers, and adding a little bit of that nice mint colour there. And then switching my brushes and cleaning my brushes and mixing some more colours, I'm now adding in these darker mint leaves and adding a little bit of shape to some of them, a little bit of texture, and you can see we're just adding in some of that spiky detail now over the top, and a little bit using the tip of the brush for the one at the back as well. As I say, the leaves were quite dark in colour, and you can see we're just painting in those shapes and really creating that mint look, and adding in some darker colours, and the lighter colours show through, which really helps to create that 3D look. And we're just painting in some dark colours yet again over the top, another layer to really help build that form. So you can see here that's come together really nicely compared to our first layer, really building up those colours. So moving on to the parsley, we're just painting in those darker curled leaves, and we're just adding in a little bit of colour to those other ones. Some of them are lighter where the light's hitting depending on the angle, and it's darker at the front. Some of them will be darker at the back and lighter at the front. So yeah, it's quite interesting how you can do these different curved leaves opposed to just flat leaves, and it creates a really nice 3D look on the herbs. And some of the edges on the parsley were quite dark as well, so we tried to achieve this as well with adding in some darker colours at the top. And we've got the handy tissue paper if there's any mistakes mistakes. So yes, we've created a nice varied leaf here and leaves within it, and then we're just talking over the very third layer of the watercolour, adding in a few little tiny details to the rosemary, adding some little outlines and some little sharper details just to finish that off. And just going over all of the herbs now just to finish them, just adding in a few little background darker leaves to the dill, again to help that foreground and background view to make it a little bit more realistic. And we're just using a very small brush, a 2 or 4 would be ideal for these finer details. And we're just finishing off our central basil, again just adding in a little bit more of those vein details and really bringing it all together. So I always think these little herbs would look really nice if you are doing any sort of product design or you would love to paint for products. I always think these would look really nice on teacups and saucers and things like that. It just came to mind, so I just thought I would let you know that if you are thinking of designing for products, I think this would go really well, and like wildflowers and things like that. So yes, going on to the mint, just finishing off some of those edges, really helping define those areas with this smaller brush. And again on the parsley, just adding in a little bit of those darker defined areas and bringing it all together. So I really hope you enjoyed painting these 5 herbs with me, and again I do have more information over on Patreon, and if you're not following me on Instagram, then it would be good to see you over there. My handle is @Bloomella. So thank you so much again for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.